Welcome everybody. It's lovely to have such a big turnout, and we appreciate you all coming. I'll introduce myself firstly. I'm Dr. Sean Watson. I'm a Sydney neurologist. I'm also a father and a grandfather and a few other things besides, and chair of New South Wales DEA. And for all of those reasons, I'm quite passionate about the topic we're discussing tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with these three amazing panellists. Kind of roughly the way we'll do things is I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll open up discussion with some pre-prepared questions, and hopefully there'll be time for some open questions at the end, but very much in the spirit of respect and a kind of a conversation amongst friends, exploring health and climate. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this, this beautiful, beautiful part of the world. What an extraordinary place this is, and we're so lucky to be here looking out across the ocean and the escarpment and the beach. And I pay my respects to the elders of the Garigal people, past, present, emerging, and on behalf of all of you good people here today. For tens of thousands of years they've cared for this country, and the way I see country is the whole lot. Animals, plants, community, soil, water, air and climate. And we have so much to learn from them, and so much we are trying to learn from them. Doctors are trusted and respected because we provide care, because we care for our patients, because we care about our patients. And to truly provide care for our patients, we also need to care for the whole lot, as I said before, including the climate and the planet. Our health depends fundamentally on healthy community, soil, water, air, weather, climate, and planet. And I do expect a little bit of respect from the audience. Because you're quite welcome to leave. We will be happy to hear one or two respectful questions at the end, but we don't want you to be interfering with our respectful, friendly conversation. No, not at the moment. You can't speak at the moment. Yeah. As doctors, mic up. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Sorry. I normally put it too close. So, but as doctors, we try and adhere to first, do no harm. That is a basic principle of medical ethics. And at the moment, we are very far from this. We're still doing business as usual, as a society and as an economy, driving past 1.5 degrees warming in a gas guzzler with our foot hard on the accelerator. Sometimes, personally, I imagine that this is all just a child's nightmare, and I will wake tomorrow and be reassured by my grown-ups. But we here are the grown-ups, and it is our duty to deal with this reality. And I think of this as part of my duty of care to my patients as a doctor, and to all people, places and creatures I care about. My grandchildren, my gorgeous grandchildren, my children, my dogs, my horses, the gangs, the whales, the dolphins, and all of you guys. And just to repeat, tonight is a conversation between grown-up friends. It will be respectful, thank you, and I ask you all to share in that spirit. It will deal with uncomfortable reality, but will work towards solutions. So we're trying to make this as positive as possible, focusing on health and climate. So let's put our health first. Health is about reducing death, disease and suffering, but it is also very much about quality of life. And quality of life is also about our way of life. Certain groups in our society and politics act as though they own the Australian way of life. Look out the window again. This is our way of life. Land, sea, air, creatures, plants, our healthy quality of life fundamentally depends on this. So tonight on our panel, to discuss the interdependency between our health and our climate, we have three very special people. And I'm very, very proud and very pleased to introduce, first of all, Dr. Sophie Scamps. Who, of course, is a medical practitioner and your representative in Parliament here. Professor Anthony Harris on the far side. Who's a Northern Beaches resident and Professor of Psychiatry at Sydney University. And Dr. Kate Wiley, a GP who's flown in from Adelaide, who's our Doctors for the Environment Executive Director. So, yeah, thank you for the applause and the introduction. So I'm just going to ask a series of questions. Sophie, perhaps we could start with you. Are you able to tell us a personal story of how you came to understand climate change as a threat to those things you hold closest to your heart?
Thank you. And I think this is where we all have common ground, because every single one of us, if you have children, if you have relatives, you all want the best outcome for your children, your grandchildren, your friends and family. So for me, when I had young children, we wanted their lives to be as happy and as healthy and as prosperous as possible. And I had this concern that the future we were leaving them would not be the type of upbringing that I'd had, in a world that I'd had. And so that concerned me. And it sat at the back of my head for a long while. And I felt that our country was not leading on climate change. The evidence was there. It's one of these issues that had been there for decades, and yet our country was not acting. So I had looked around for others to act for a long while, and telling people, we need to step up on this. And then finally it kind of dawned on me when I had a conversation with my then 12-year-old son and his friends, who said, and we were talking, they were asking me about climate change, and I was trying not to be alarmist and said, well, this is something that you guys will probably end up having to deal with. And one beautiful boy turned to me and said, yes, because you adults have failed us. And so that's when I had a bit of a wake-up call, and I thought, right, well, actually, I have an enormous amount of privilege. I have a stable home, job, education, all these things. Why am I not the person who's standing up to do something? And if I really do want to have a good outcome for my children, this is how I can best create them a safe and secure future.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And really just the same question, just a personal reflection from each of our panellists. So over to you, Kate.
Oh, thank you, Sean, and hello, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. The view out this window is just magnificent. What a wonderful place to live you all have. It's beautiful. For me, climate change, I first heard about climate change when I was at boarding school many years ago. And I remember one of my friends being worried about it and me thinking, oh, that's scary. I don't think I want to have to worry about that. And that was in the 80s. This poor person's been worried about it all that time. And, that's the thing. And, I meet climate scientists who, have known about it for decades and decades, and it's always a sort of a concern that they're carrying around with them. For me, it was when I read the 1.5 degree report that the IPCC handed down in 2018, and it absolutely rocked my world. It hit me. And I found myself pretty overwhelmed, actually, for a really long time, and I couldn't do anything. I was really sad and really scared and really angry and felt very betrayed by my government, and I also felt very upset that the fossil fuel industry had known about this for decades and had chosen to stymie the transition, chosen to muddy the waters. And it took me about 6 months to kind of digest it, if that makes any sense. And then I thought, well, I better try. I better do something. And I've got a 17-year-old, and I couldn't look my daughter in the eye if I didn't do everything I can to create a safe future for her. And I thought, well, I'm a lucky human. I'm a doctor. I've got, an opportunity to do something about climate. And I heard about Doctors for the Environment in Australia. And I thought, gee, here's a whole group of people that think like me. I think I'm going to go and hang out with them and see what I can do. And I started off as a general member and then, gradually got more and more involved. And I suppose, I think climate change is this great big global problem that we're all facing. And as I said, it is overwhelming. And, we all think, well, what can I do? I'm just one little tomato on the vine. This great big problem, what can I do? And you can do something. You can do one thing. And then, hopefully other people will do their one thing as well. And perhaps we can create the massive societal transformation that we need and move on from fossil fuels that are basically the cause of this great big mess that we're in.
Beautiful, Kate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that personal reflection. And over to you, Anthony, the same question.
Thanks, Sean. As Sean said, I'm a local. I know some of the faces in the audience, which is great. And I live in a bush block up behind Narrabeen Lagoon. And in the terrible summer of bushfires that had people running to the beaches to escape the fires that were surrounding them, I'd known about the reports and all of those, the warming and the effects of that. But to have that, and I'd prepared inadequately, probably, for the bushfires that might come to my block, but to have those pictures of those fires coming through the bush in a way which was just completely unstoppable, and to know that my egress, the way that I could get out of my block, was pretty dodgy, that if I wanted to leave, I'd have to leave really early. But what did really early mean on a windy westerly day when it's 39 degrees in my little valley? How early should I and my family, and I've now got my daughter and her children, my grandchildren living with me. What does early mean on a hot summer's day? And I still don't know. So I moved from just thinking, I suppose, in an intellectual way about the way that climate change was really important, but I'd have to do something about it sometime, to thinking that these fires, which had burnt through the block where I was, a couple in 1994 before I'd moved there, and I'd seen where I was living before the burnt gum leaves come down out of the sky from those fires back in 1994, that perhaps I needed to do something about it. And that's one of the reasons I'm here. That's the main reason I'm here.
I guess I should add my own personal reflection briefly as a doctor and moderator. Same time as Anthony's talking about, sort of late December 2019. My daughter was having her 30th birthday party with a whole bunch of friends and family. Very heavily pregnant, 8 months pregnant at the time, and she basically spent the whole night in her bedroom crying inconsolably about bringing another child, her second child, into this world. And that just shocked me and hurt me to the core. And so I had to find some way of kind of making a difference. And here I am. Here we all are. And I just wanted to start with that personal reflection from each of us. And I guess continuing it to some extent, perhaps again starting with Sophie, as a doctor, as a medical practitioner, if you could describe a patient or an event from your practice that kind of started you making a connection between climate and health.
It's hard to pinpoint a patient, but I guess the fires, of course, come to mind that were here because we were all inhaling the smoke. We had a lot of mothers who were pregnant, really concerned about the impacts through their placenta on their unborn child. So that was one issue that I was dealing with a lot. But one of the things that really struck me, we've got this thing called lethal humidity now. With every rise in 1 degree of temperature, you have 7 degrees increased percent in humidity. So the death of that young man, and I'm not saying, the death of that young man, the rugby league player, when it was 33 degrees, very humid day, died from heat stress during, after a training session. That type of lethal humidity is something that the medical fraternity is getting more and more concerned about. You can survive, apparently, the human body can survive if it's dry heat up to 54 degrees Celsius. It's pretty hot. But with high humidity, that level comes down to kind of 33, 30, even 31 degrees. So it's something to consider. So that is one issue. And the other issue that I find really concerning is air pollution and also plastic pollution, and how that relates to dementia and cognitive impairment. And even short-term cognitive impairment, also for all of us as we grow older, but also the IQ of our children is something that I am concerned about.
Yeah, I might just pick up on that. Yeah. Run it along. Let's run along with it. That stuff about air pollution and how it impacts cognitive development and, associations with developmental delay and behavioural problems in our children. What a terrible thing. And I think, when we think about, gas in the home, increasing the risk of asthma by about 12% and 30% of asthma exacerbations associated with gas in the home. Or we think about 1,100 people who die every year because of the exhaust from our cars. And, you put that against the road toll and go, oh, wait a minute, it's wrong in the road toll, but if it comes from a fossil fuel, that's okay. Or then we look at the people up the road, with all the coal mines up near Newcastle and, they're breathing in all this dust and muck, and that's increasing their respiratory disease and increasing their cardiovascular disease. You think these things aren't benign? If you replace all of those things I said with, it was an asbestos thing or it was a tobacco thing, we all would immediately go, I've got to regulate against that. That's not healthy, time to move on. But somehow we've kind of been sort of lulled into this false sense of security around fossil fuels, and they're really, really dangerous. So when, coming back to my work as a clinician, I see, as a GP, a lot of my work is mental health work, and, I meet a lot of young people very worried about their future. I've certainly had a similar experience to your poor daughter, Sean, of, women choosing not to have children because they don't want to bring them into the world. And as a parent, I find that to be the most absolutely tragic thing. That's, wow. And also meet a lot of older people, a lot of grandmas and grandpas who come in and see me for their various things, blood pressure and cholesterol and all the things you go to the GP about. And they say how worried they are about the future we're leaving their children, and that they can see that their world's changed, that they can remember the way seasons are different from their childhood to how it is now. They can see the gardeners who can see it in the garden. And so, it's this lived experience of our world, and somehow we try and pretend it's not there because it's so hard. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. My experience is one of lost sleep. So I'm a public psychiatrist. I'm still a public psychiatrist in New South Wales, and I work at Westmead out in Western Sydney, and that emergency department is just completely packed all the time. And a lot of the people who pack into it are my patients. And when there's a patient, they ring the consultant on call, which occasionally happens to be me. And on that same summer, which was so hot, when I was on call, I just was not getting any sleep. They would just call after call after call. And I just thought to myself, what is happening with this? What is happening? And so with some medical students, we went back and we looked at ED presentations for mental health and looked through all the temperature and the air pollution and all the other factors, and found that there was a correlation. And so that was there, that experience that was qualitative, experiential, not getting enough sleep because I was on call, was connected with with the heat and the way that people were presenting.
Thanks. Thank you. Kate, I was wondering if you just give us a kind of an elevator pitch on Doctors for the Environment Australia and what we are and what we do.
Yeah, thank you. Look, fundamentally, Doctors for the Environment Australia put on this event because we want to educate our community about the health impacts of climate change. We understand that we need a healthy planet to have healthy people, and we are 2,000 doctors and medical students across the country who volunteer their time because they care about our community's health and what we are seeing with impacts of global heating and what it's doing to health. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kate. That's great. We've touched on some of my questions already, but Anthony, I'd really like to drill down a little bit more into the mental health impacts of climate change and what you're seeing, the diversity of things you're seeing as a clinical psychiatrist in the public system and also through your research, and just how it all kind of fits together. And I guess how we're seeing climate change pouring petrol on the fire of the mental health crisis.
Thanks, Sean. And look, it is a crisis. There really has been an increase in depression and anxiety in our community over the last 20 years in particular, but there really has been an increase. And nobody knows the whole answer for why that has been, but it certainly has increased. From the point of view of climate change, I suppose it's coming, the problems for mental health and climate change come in three particular broad areas. The first one, the most obvious one, is that there's an increase in the number of disasters, and that's associated with climate change. If you're getting bad fires, as I talked about, if you're getting those increased number of cyclones, the cyclones are more intense and more damaging, that has a real impact on the people who have to live through it. And that sticks with them. And for some of them, it's going to be very traumatic, and that will lead to its own particular problems, and that needs to be looked after. The next broad area of climate change as a problem, this is particularly with heat, is that if you're mentally unwell, if you're having problems and you're on medication or you're suffering from the negative effects, that social effects that having a mental illness has, you're not going to be as well off as other people in the community, you're not going to have the same resources, then heat is bad for your health. It'll interact with the medications that you might be taking. It'll interact with your ability to get out, to engage in the rest of the community. It has a debilitating effect across all the other areas of health beyond just your mental health. And I'm sure Kate will be able to talk about that. The third area is that the changes that people are seeing are really upsetting for a lot of people. Now, both Kyle and Sean have talked about climate distress, and that is something that I see particularly with younger people. So I look mostly after younger people, but a lot of them are really feeling quite desperate at times about the changes and what that will mean for them in 20, 40 years while they're alive. And those choices about should I have a child is something that I've been asked. So that effect, that loss, that sense of powerlessness that often comes with it, that this is a problem that's so big that I have no choice but to just withdraw or get myself out of this situation by dissociating myself. So that is the other real effect that's happening. My rural colleagues will also talk to me about farmers who have increased rates of suicide when the droughts are bad, who feel terrible sometimes about what they're doing to their land to get the money out of the land or their involvement in that, and who feel quite guilty at their part of what has been happening. And so this is these three broad areas of the disasters that are happening, the effects of heat on medication and general health, but also this real loss, this distress that comes from seeing the climate change are all there. So they'd be the areas.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to that. You know, the College of Psychiatry considers eco-anxiety and climate grief a rational response to a real threat. You know, they see it as rational for us to be scared. And of course, you know, because it is scary. You know, and as you say, with young people, there's that very well-known study by Hickman about where, was it 10,000 young people across the planet and 1,000 of them in Australia, showing that 83% of young people, so between 16 and 24, felt that we'd failed to take care of our planet. And more than half feel sad, anger, powerless and guilty. I think that's terrible that our young people feel guilty about the things that have, you know, not their faults, not on them. I don't think it's actually on us either, by the way. I just want to put that out there. I don't think we should be, you know, say, oh, I did this terrible thing. You know, it's the fossil fuel industry that's caused this problem. They've known about the impacts of what they've done since at least the 50s and have deliberately slowed down the science. But that's sort of a side topic. But 43% in the Hickman study, young people, their climate distress impacts on their day-to-day lives. You know, it's stopping them living the life that they should be able to live. And, you know, that's sad.
I'll just add one thing. I definitely, as a GP, saw young people in distress because of climate change as one of their major issues. But I would just say that distress is absolutely accentuated when you know there's an issue and yet your leaders are failing to act. That's where that absolute distress comes in, when you feel utterly powerless. And so that is a really key thing as well.
And that's what they found in Hickman as well, that the amount of distress was correlated with perceived government inaction, and that when governments start to do the right thing and actually, you know, be forward footing on climate and say, hey, this is a real problem, let's get on and do the right thing, we feel better.
Thank you. Fabulous conversation. I think the mental health aspect of this is so important, and I want to stick with it a little bit longer. I doubt there is a single person in the room who isn't touched by mental illness in some way, directly or indirectly. And I guess what I want to move to is how do we help our kids? What do we do? I guess we've touched on that to some extent. Sophie and Kate have touched on that, but perhaps Anthony, you can give us some advice. Parents, particularly in the room, and young people in the room.
Look, this is really important because the despair breeds upon itself, I suppose. If you're feeling as if there's nothing you can do, then that leaves you in a very lonely place. And I think about this in three sort of ways. You need to think about your own thoughts. You need to think. You need to do things to make this better, and you need to work with other people. So it's about inside, action, and community connection. They're the three sort of broad ways that I'd sort of put this together. Now, as we've suggested, a lot of people read the stuff that's coming out, they worry about it a great deal, and they catastrophize. And it's sort of the thought processes go down, you know, I understand that this is going to happen, that carbon dioxide keeps on being pumped into the air, temperatures are going to keep on rising. President Trump and President Xi and Prime Minister Modi all want to drill, baby, drill. There's nothing, it's all going out of my control, and there's nothing I can do about it, and I'm completely stuffed, and I might as well go home and hide under my bed. That sort of way of thinking, things going onwards and onwards, completely out of control, is the sort of catastrophizing which paralyzes. And so helping people come out of that and begin to think about the things they can do in the immediate term. So to think about the positive things that they can do within their own community. There's lots of things about relaxation, about trying to use meditation type techniques to try and decrease your overall level of stress, which are very important for many individuals. But helping people unlock that spiral of doom is really important. So things to do, as Kylie said, as we're all here for, doing something, getting involved and getting out is really important. So especially if you can do that within your own local community. I'll come to that. Getting out and getting into nature, getting into having a surf, having a swim, getting out and having some exercise is really important for your general depression, any sense of depression or anxiety. It helps a great deal. No medications involved with that whatsoever. And making sure that that young person that you're looking after is looking after themselves, is eating something reasonably, isn't getting drunk every Friday and Saturday night, is trying to avoid those all the different substances that they can. These are common sense things, but they get lost in the despair and the arguments that you end up having with your child anyhow occasionally. And they're not sensible, most of the arguments. So the final thing is community. So it's great if you can do it with by yourself. It's great if you can involve your family, and your children have certainly motivated you, it sounds like, Sophie. But getting out and doing things with the rest of the community and being involved in these causes. These are important things, and people together can do much more than by themselves. That connectivity is important. So we know that depression and anxiety involutes, cuts down connections. People have fewer and fewer connections with other people. If you can get people to begin to connect with people who are more optimistic, who see some point, that also has a positive effect and will go on and will help reinforce itself. Okay?
Thanks again, and I'll pass over to Sophie. I just want to make one point which perhaps has already been made, is that invalidating people's feelings about climate change isn't part of the solution. So helping them come to terms with it in a positive, community-orientated way is part of the solution. But telling them they're wrong and they're crazy and they're out of contact with reality is not part of the solution.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on what Anthony was saying there. The antidote to despair is action. And what you described was exactly my journey. I had this sense of despair, really, and then that spurred me to do whatever I could in my own life to make a difference and start, talking to friends. They felt very similar. We built a community group to do what we could locally on waste and things like that. And our motto was action brings hope, acting together brings change. And so it's so many times you hear that, and I've heard Jane Goodall say as well that action is hope. So it's a really important thing to get active. And I can also support the idea of getting into the ocean and surfing. It's fantastic.
And completely agree. The Australian Psychological Society has this wonderful little sheet on this called Activate. And, the first day is to acknowledge that this is a problem. Let's actually go, this really is happening and we've got to kind of get on and do. I can't remember what they all stand for, but the I is inspire positive vision. We don't have to buy the story. We can't do anything about our society's embroiled interdependence on fossil fuels. We can move on to sustainable options. We can. We just have to believe that we can and know that we can and work and do it. And just, let's not buy this. We're not licked yet. I'm not giving up. I'm going to spend the rest of my day doing everything I can to make sure that my planet has a safe and healthy future. And, let's give it a crow.
Fabulous. Just moving closer to home to the beautiful northern beaches, I guess an important theme that kind of comes up in a lot of this work is that there are health co-benefits with action on climate and action on fossil fuels, and some of them have been touched on already. Exercise and nature, for example. Just wondering, Sophie in particular, if you could just comment on the way you see that working in the northern beaches.
Yes, thank you. So I also did a Master of Public Health and learned about the social determinants of health. So things like having secure housing is really important. Our environment is really important to us as well. Having food security, water security, these things really determine our basic fundamental ability to have a healthy life. So we look what's happening here. We're surrounded by a national park. We've heard from people like Greg Mullins, who was the former Commissioner for New South Wales Fire and Rescue, saying that the type of fires that happened in LA, which absolutely were climate driven when you listen to what happened there, can happen here. So that's not good for our health in any regard. One, the distress, the trauma, the loss of housing, from air pollution, all those things. So it's these really big extreme weather events that'll impact us. And at the same time, as we heard, this growing sort of epidemic of mental ill health and distress and despair that is happening as well. There's so many things that are impacting our local environment. And even the fact that we may have, we're getting coastal erosion, we have the seawall in Collaroy. That will impact housing, people's ability to insure their houses in the future. There's no arguing with insurance agencies. They're either going to insure you or they're not. So currently, 1 in 20 houses are uninsurable because they're in areas where they'll be impacted by extreme weather events. In 10 years' time, that'll be 1 in 10. So if you have an uninsurable house, it means you're very difficult to either buy a house or sell that house. So these things we need to be thinking about if we want a safe, secure, prosperous future, which is the fundamental basis of human health.
And Anthony, thank you, Sophie, thank you. Anthony, if you could just kind of comment on that in relation to mental health. I guess you...
Look, I've talked about a bit, but social determinants of health affect all areas of health, and mental health is just one of the many. I've worked all through the western suburbs, and if I leave here on a summer day, when I get to Parramatta, Westmead, it'll be 5 degrees hotter on average than what it is here. And when I also worked out at Nepean and in Penrith, and out there it's about 10 degrees hotter than it is here. And that's a huge heat gradient across this one city. And if you so for some of my patients, the only place they can get cool is to go to the big shopping malls. That's the only, they don't have air conditioning. And so those social determinants of whether you have the money to afford some insulation and some cooling becomes really important when it's a 40-degree day and you're unwell. And it's also can be quite dangerous if you've got to walk to that shopping centre. So these social determinants that govern your environment, how far a park is, whether the bus is coming anywhere near your house, whether there are trees in your local area, whether you do have places to go to which are air conditioned, really have a big impact in a city which is as rich as our own, and that flows through to mental health as it does to physical health.
And I might just take up a little bit on health co-benefits. So, fundamentally, climate change health impacts have got a big social justice aspect to them, and people who are better off are more likely to cope with things a bit better because they can afford to go to the GP, for example. Like, when there's a fire, it's hard to breathe, right? Obviously. And if you've got asthma, you can be in big trouble when there's a fire. You might have an acute asthma exacerbation, need to go to an emergency department or need to do a walk-in to a GP clinic. If your asthma is better managed because you can afford to pay the gap at the GP, then you're less likely to have that exacerbation. But we're at a point now where Medicare rebates have not caught up with inflation for the last 20 years. And that means we've got a lot of people that can't afford to go to the GP. And so do they get their asthma managed properly? No, they don't. And so those people are more vulnerable when there's a fire, when they have to interact with smoke. The other thing about health co-benefits are also the logical ones of if you ride a bike or you walk, you don't have any emissions, and it's good for your heart. If you follow a plant-rich diet, some meat but plant-rich, it's good for your heart, it's good for your cholesterol, decreases your blood pressure, also has less carbon emissions associated with it.
Fabulous. Look, I think we've covered a lot of territory, and we've got a little bit more to go. I want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but I think we've kind of already touched on the fact that I think we're all aware that cost of living, housing affordability are big issues. I'm sure there are big issues here in this audience and very big issues across the community in Australia. I think we've already touched on the fact that climate change, fossil fuels, cost of living and housing affordability are all interdependent and interconnected. I just wondered if there were any other comments that Sophie would like to make about that. Sorry to put you on the spot. It's a bit of a tough one. You've done that already when you've talked about insurance. Obviously, climate change impacting insurance impacts cost of living, full stop, and housing affordability and availability.
Well, I guess one thing to think about, I keep coming back to the basics. Like you think about the people up in Lismore where they're still not living in a house, a long-term house. Some were living in tents for a couple of years. And similarly with the Black Summer bushfires, they still don't have homes. Talked about insurance costs for housing. We can also talk about food security with changing weather patterns, droughts, extreme weather events. Food prices will go up. That impacts everybody's quality of life. And of course, people who are less well off are hit harder, those type of things. So there will be inequitable or impacts on our society, which I think is one of the things that we will have to deal with. Yep.
So is this, so fundamentally, open mic, get to say what I want. Climate change is a health issue, and that means we need to treat it. Just like we treat everything else. Climate change is called the greatest health problem facing humanity by the World Health Organization, and there's vast amounts of medical research into the health impacts of climate change that you can look up and, go to the Lancet Planetary Health Journal, go to the World Health Organization, and for the science stuff, go to NASA. NASA's got some great stuff about climate. And I certainly think if they can put people on the moon, they can probably measure temperature trends. What we need to do is, if we approach climate change as a health issue, then we treat it like a health issue. And that means, moving on from coal, oil and gas. I mean, what's the first thing we've done to address the health harms of tobacco? Quit smoking. So the first thing we need to do to address the health harms of fossil fuels is to quit coal and oil and gas. But the problem where the analogy ends is that I, as an individual, can choose not to smoke. I just don't smoke. Most of us, I'm a child of the 80s. Lots of us smoked back in the day. But we all quit because we went, this is a bad idea. We used to smoke on planes. We used to smoke in hospitals, but now we have moved on. The problem with fossil fuels, so embroiled into our daily lives, right? It's hard to not use them because, what car do you drive? How do you heat your home? What's the buses made? All of those sorts of things. And that's when we need our governments to do the right thing and wean us off. We need government action. We need our governments to acknowledge that climate change is a real thing that's impacting the health of Australians now and our well-being and our insurance policies and the price of food and our water security, and do the right thing by the people, put the interests of the community, put our health first, put our health above the interests of the fossil fuel industry.
Fabulous again. Just before we move to a few questions from the audience, just want to touch on two kind of specific issues. And perhaps Sophie, first of all, does nuclear power have a role in getting us where we need to get with climate in Australia?
Well, interestingly, we've got an event on this, I think, next week about our energy future. So having spoken to a lot of people about nuclear, you take into consideration that radioactive waste takes 10,000 years to become safe for people to be near. But there could be in Australia a time when you have small modular nuclear. The technology does not exist currently in any way, shape or form. There's pilot in China and America. Actually, the American one failed. But there is discussion that small modular nuclear may be required to reduce that really hard to abate last bit of the sector. But that does not mean we should stop what we're doing now and go full tilt with renewables, because already we've got 46% of our energy is provided by renewables. We've got a huge pipeline of investment. We've got all these private investors, gung-ho, ready to go. They want to get going on it. And we have energy prices. We know that it's cheaper. So it's one of these things, bring down our energy bills at the same time. So there may be a role for nuclear in the future. You can't count it out, but there's also other technologies coming online as well.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, please do. And also, beyond that, if you could take the conversation to wind turbines and whether there are any negative health impacts of wind turbines.
Moving from nuclear to wind turbines. So the thing that I worry, like Doctors for the Environment, if you go on our website, we've got a position statement about nuclear energy. And what our biggest concern is it slows the transition. We've got a nuclear ban, a federal nuclear ban that would have to be overturned. We take, however, they reckon it's like at least, 20, 30 years to build these nuclear reactors. How many election cycles is that? Right? Let's think a bit practically around this. My other concern is that they're very water intensive. So, here we are, we're in Australia. It's a hot and dry country. It's getting hotter and drier because of climate change. Nuclear reactors, I can't remember the numbers exactly. I think it's 1,500 to 250 litres of water per megawatt hour versus wind and solar, which are like 200 and 400 respectively. When there's that next big drought that's going to come, like we all remember the millennial drought. I remember towns, water getting trucked in. Parents not wanting to bathe their kids in the water because of the quality of water coming out of the tap, or sometimes turning on the tap and nothing coming out at all. Water insecurity is a big problem for us in Australia. If we have nuclear, what do we say to those communities when there's a drought? Oh, sorry, there's no water for you. We need that water to keep the nuclear reactor cool. Because basically, without the water, and cool enough water too, you have to turn the nuclear reactor off. And that means there's no energy for the community. You can't turn your air conditioner on. Your fridge is going to turn off. You're going to lose all the food in the freezer. You can't, hopefully the hospital's got a good backup generator. It's kind of not the ethical thing to do. Let's think about water security when we think about nuclear. That's my fundamental on that.
Sorry, stole it. Yeah, so with nuclear, when I think about it, the argument often is, okay, let's be practical. It's about cost, it's about timeliness, and it's about reliability of our energy supply. So cost, nuclear is going to be twice as expensive, and it'll have to be state-owned. $600 billion at least of taxpayer money. That's a huge amount to supply maybe 4% of our energy supply. Timeliness. The time for action is this decade. Even the next 5 years is absolutely crucial. We don't have time to wait 20 years, and we know it will take 20 years to build a large reactor, and the small modular nuclear reactors really don't exist currently. And then the other thing is reliability. So we hear a lot about reliability. Nuclear is good because it's reliable if it's up and running potentially, but maybe not with the water issues. But in the meantime, we will have to continue to rely on our very old coal-fired powered stations, which are increasingly unreliable. And we know that a lot of the blackouts that we've had recently are due to the fact that our coal-fired power stations are failing. They're all due, I think nearly all of them are due to come offline by 2035. We need to fill that gap before then, and nuclear simply can't fill that gap yet.
I think we'll give the wind turbines a miss. We've got it, yeah. Just because we're running a little bit out of time. Not that there's a kind of a clear deadline for when we have to finish, but we have to finish soonish. You all need to get home and have some food. I'm sure, Sophie, you're particularly busy, and you particularly need to get home and have some food. Perhaps just a final reflection from each of you about some kind of simple solutions, some simple actions that audience members here from the Northern Beaches can take to, a step. Many of you have probably already taken several steps in the directions we've been talking about, but a simple step you might be able to take.
Well, a simple step for me is to get up and do something. To do that, to get involved with your local community. My wife, who runs bush regeneration groups all over the place, will scream if I don't at least mention bush regeneration at least once. But seriously, going out and taking a little bit of the agency back into your own hands and do something for this crisis.
Yeah, that's it, Anthony. Basically, mine is acknowledge the problem. Now, this problem's not going to go away if we ignore it. It's going to get bigger and worse all the time. So let's own it. This is happening now. We're alive at this very, very hard time in our humans' history. So let's acknowledge the problem and work to create solutions together. And as we've talked a lot tonight about community, and we can do things together. The thing that makes you most resilient to a natural disaster is knowing your neighbour. So let's talk to each other. Let's all get water tanks. That's like a simple one. But yeah, let's talk.
I think I said it before, action brings hope, acting together brings change. And so simply stepping into doing something, and it doesn't matter what you do in many cases, but it can lead to more and more things, as I found out. But yes, and speaking up, and as you said, speaking to your neighbours, I think is really, really important. Having conversations, respectful conversations with your friends and your neighbours, and listening to one another, because there is a lot of distress out there, and finding common ground. And what I think we all find is when you take it down to the basics, we all pretty much want the same thing, even if we come at it from different angles. We all want a safe, secure, prosperous planet for our children and future generations. And I think we all want to think about the world that we're handing down to them. So we can all do a lot.
Thank you very much. And just to add a few other just really simple practical things, I guess use the car a bit less and move a bit more towards active transport. Eat a bit less meat. You don't have to. We're not talking about stopping anything cold turkey here. And also think about moving your money as well. Think about your bank and your superannuation and what your money's doing in terms of this whole kind of area we've been discussing. And I guess we also have to mention, think about your vote as well, and think, it is important that you vote in a way that is, working towards a solution.
Yeah. I might have one more thing to say is I actually think that your politicians can do a whole lot more as well. I last week introduced a bill called the Wellbeing of Future Generations. And basically where that comes from, we've got multiple crises that are converging at the moment, and our young people are facing this convergence of crises: climate, environment, extinction crises, housing crisis, intergenerational inequality that's growing. We've got a mental ill health epidemic. We've got, we've got gambling infiltrating our whole society. Our children are watching it. We've got obesity epidemic. All these things, they've all been coming at us for decades. And decade after decade, politicians have failed to react in an effective way. I'm not saying that there's people of goodwill in Parliament, because there are, but whatever has been happening has been failing us utterly. We have not succeeded in turning any of these things around or preventing them. We know what's causing them quite often, many of these things, and we know the solutions, but yet we have still failed to act. Why? Because of this short-term thinking and this short-term decision-making, and also this siloed thinking. So what the Wellbeing of Future Generations is all about is how do we embed a long-term lens into our thinking. And they've done it in Wales. They introduced an act in 2015 that embeds a long-term lens into all decision-making by public bodies. They have to consider not only how a decision will help the current generation, but you have to make sure it's not going to compromise future generations from meeting their needs and their well-being. And it also means that when you make a decision, well, actually, the first thing they did was have a national conversation about what type of future they want, a healthy future, a prosperous future. It's pretty easy to agree on all those types of things, but when you're on the same page, you have a vision for your country. We don't have a vision for our country, actually. Think about it. What is our vision for our country? We're all over the place. We're going backwards and forwards. The needle flicks all over the place. And it shouldn't be revolutionary for us to have a vision for our country. So getting people, having a national conversation where you bring people into that conversation to decide what type of country we want to hand down to our children is vitally important. And then you can progress towards it. How do you do it? Well, you also have a framework for making decisions where you not only consider the silo that you're in, but you also think about how that decision is going to impact the public health of the nation, how it's going to impact the economy and the prosperity of the nation, maybe air pollution, the climate, the environment, all different facets, the cultural vibrancy of a nation. And then you come up with far better decisions rather than this very narrow thinking and very short-term thinking. And we need to do it because we've got a lot of issues that we need to deal with down there in Parliament.
I think we'll leave this part of the discussion for now. I really thank all three of you for just being so kind of open and sharing so many rich ideas with us all and with one another and with me. I think in many ways what I've come away with is the importance of communication, relationship and community, and that's what I want to see growing, and I think that will make a huge difference across this area and across Australia. We've got time for a few questions. They obviously have to be respectful and in keeping with the spirit of the kind of conversation we've been having so far. You were up first. Your hand was up first. Yeah.
Thanks for what you do. Thanks for what you do, doctors. And you all make sense. But how can you or we warn people who are flooded by dominant climate change denying antisocial media in the post-truth, post-democratic, global disinformation world of Trump, Dutton, Gina Rinehart, fossil fuel giants controlling politicians, according to Senator Pocock? So how can we get the message across and not be drowned out?
That's a big question and a great question. I'm actually going to put it over to Anthony. Kate wants it, she's got it.
I'll just say very quickly, misinformation is a thing, right? There's so much misinformation there. And, the way that the algorithms work in social media is that, you always get fed the same thing all the time. And so people get their misinformation reinforced. Go to credible sources. Maybe get your news not from your social media. Most of us now don't get our news from the paper or from the online newspapers. We get it from our Facebook feed. How about we go to the credible sources rather than, sharing the meme from, someone you went to school with 20 years ago? That kind of thing. That's the best I've got, though.
Why the psychiatrist gets asked for this is an interesting thought. But look, I think we all need a diversity of sources in our lives. So just having one single source is never a great idea. We need to challenge our thoughts from time to time. That's not a bad thing. And when people are saying that they're climate deniers or anti-science or whatever it might be, this is a discussion that has to be had without chat, just talking through it and trying to establish that common ground, which, as Sophie was saying, most of us really have about what we want to have done. We are very worried about many similar things, and trying to find solutions to those problems can be easier if you keep in mind the goal rather than go to war immediately about the minutiae of what's happening in this press just at the moment. So keeping those central purposes and the values that you might have right helps you get to the solution with people who you mightn't exactly agree with.
Look, it's such an important question. I'll pass it over to Sophie as well. And I think health is one of those core values that we need to always keep in mind. And I guess we've been touching on health repeatedly through all of these discussions.
I was going to talk about, the information. We have currently social media platforms that are owned by multi-billionaires that are controlling the information. So one of the number one things we need to do is to bring greater transparency around those algorithms. What is the information that is being accentuated and amplified, and what is the information that is being suppressed? And I think the very number one thing that we would all like, that we would all agree on, is we need far greater transparency around that. We need to open up those curtains because it's very opaque and it's very protected, and there's no research or currently it's very hard for researchers to even look in there. So that's one thing that I think is really, really important, that we understand how the information is being fed to everyone. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think. No, I'm actually. There are so many hands up. Okay, yes, please.
I'm fifth generation Australian, and I've watched the weather remaining pretty much the same all my life, from the country as well. My question is, with regards to the National Oceanic Administration Department in America, which is a government website, they list laser technology, ionospheric technology that manipulates weather. Now, you can actually look it up on the government website, the same as the 1967 Victorian Act for cloud seeding. I am asking you a question, how that, as well as the satellites creating problems in the atmosphere, is contributing to the atmosphere and the climate change, rather than just one thing that you keep promoting as fossil fuels. As well, I will say, with regards to funding, the World Health Organization is funded by predominantly Bill Gates Foundation. And it is true. It's a fact. As well, he also, I do have a question for you as well. Aluminium that is used in the atmosphere, does it affect your mind neurologically, because you were talking about mental health? Do these metals affect how you are in your does heavy metal have a toxicity effect that is sprayed in the...
Thank you for that. Thank you for that very complicated question.
Well, thank you. There's a few questions in there, and yeah, and lots of people have questions in the room, and I think it's great that we're all inquiring. The Oceanic, website, I haven't had a look at that, so I can't comment on that. I have had a look at the IPCC though, and the IPCC is 14,000 top scientists from around the world that get together to measure climate, and they say that it is unequivocal that human-made action has warmed the land and ocean, and the primary cause of that is fossil fuel combustion. And unequivocal in science speak is like dead set sure. Often scientists will say things like likely, very likely, extremely likely. For the scientists to get to unequivocal, that means there is no room for doubt. This is a done bit of science. It's a done deal. So that's where I look. The other questions that you had, I'm sorry, there was just too many of them to remember, and I think I'll let Sophie answer that.
Just simply about metals. Lots of metals do have effect upon the brain. And there's a range of those metals, and Sean will have seen some for neurological diseases as they're linked to a range of mental states. Usually they're there because people are living in unusual places with heavy contamination, or they have a genetic problem which leads to unusual concentration. But yes, metals do have an effect upon people.
Any other one last question. I think we're just about done. Yes, please go ahead.
I want to respectfully just make an observation. I was born in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and 57 years ago, I visited an atomic plant which had just been finished in 7 years, and it's still working. I don't understand if Argentines can build an atomic plant in 7 years. Surely Australians can build it in the same amount of time.
Would anyone?
Thank you. Look, I don't know about the Argentine and how large it was, all that type of thing, but there's many models around the world currently in modern. So in the UK, I think there's a plant that's taken. It was going to be 11 years, then it was going to be 13 years. Now it's closer to 19 years to build, and that's in the south of England. Not only that, but it's blown out of cost proportions, and they're known for going out way over cost as well. It's now, I think, $93 billion for this reactor. That is an enormous amount. So the other thing is, and where was it? There's another one being built in UA. Thank you, UA. And you might know this better than me, some people, but maybe it was built in 11, 12 years. Is that right? Can somebody correct me? But that's correct. But they have basically very cheap slave labour. They're a dictatorship. We don't have that in Australia, and nor currently do we have the nuclear laws to allow it. So it will take longer. Australia doesn't have the know-how either. We've never made a nuclear power station in Australia before either. It will take, but looking at places around the world, that's how long it's taking.
The one in Lucas Heights is Argentinian. As a matter of fact, it was an Argentinian model, but that's a completely different matter.
I think we. Who would you like? Oh, Talat, would you like to ask a question? We'll finish on one last question. We're not staying here all night. Well, I think we've covered a lot of territory.
Thank you. I wanted to thank our fabulous panel for this amazing discussion. I'm a local gynecologist, and we provide probably the largest number of contraceptive support to our community. And we are seeing so many young women coming and asking and being really worried. I just want to comment and say that this is a reality, and it's quite distressing to see younger women. It's 100% that person's decision to make in terms of fertility, but we wouldn't want climate to be a reason that we should be doing better. And so I guess what I'm asking is, do you have any specific advice that I can guide them to, any website, anything to support them better? Because this is a reality, and it's very sad that our children are having to make these decisions about fertility based on our reality of a climate crisis.
Thank you very much. An excellent question. Would one of our panelists like to finish off?
Yeah, thank you. And I did refer to it before. I have had patients who want to be referred to for long-term contraception because they're scared of the future. And the way I approach those conversations is carefully and respectfully, but try to unpack the fear, and then how do we address that? So what I try to do is address the fear and then see where it goes. You know, what a person chooses to do with their fertility is absolutely their own choice, and and as long as people are properly informed. But yeah, as far as resources go, DEA, we've got some good resources about mental health and climate. Certainly the Australian Psychological Society does. I don't know if the ONGs have much on that, but maybe that would be something that we could look at creating. I've also met a guy who's done it, who's had a vasectomy for climate reasons. So that's a pretty heavy thing, right? That we are making those choices as people. But yeah, we are, and I suppose we just try and, I try to practice patient-centred medicine. The person who is in the room with me is I will do my very best. No matter who you are or how you think or what you believe, I will do my best for you. And so for those people, I just try to do the best for them and, have a decision that we can both feel sits right.
I think that's the perfect note on which to end. So thank you very much.